You should do it, Zoe said immediately. You're better than half the people who'll be auditioning. What would you play? Akira asked. Sophia thought for a moment. The obvious choice was the Rachmaninoff concerto she had been practicing earlier. It would certainly impress the judges, but the idea of performing such an emotionally demanding piece in front of an audience made her palms sweat. I'm not sure, she said. I don't even know if I'm going to audition. You should, Lily said, surprising everyone. Dr. Chen is always saying we need more serious pianists in the program. Sophia looked at her, detecting no jealousy or competition in her expression, just a simple acknowledgement of Sophia's ability. Maybe we could help each other, Sophia suggested tentatively. I could work with you on bringing more emotion to your Chopin, and you could help me prepare for the audition. If I decide to do it, she added quickly. Lily's face brightened. Really, you'd help me? What are friends for? Sophia said, the word friends slipping out before she had fully considered it. But as she looked around at the circle of faces, Thomas's open grin, Zoe's approving nod, Devi's gentle smile, Akira's quiet interest and Lily's grateful expression, Sophia realized that's what they were becoming. Friends united by music, by the shared language of notes and rhythms and harmonies. That evening, when her aunt asked how school was going, Sophia found herself talking about the chamber group, about Ms. Reynolds, about the winter showcase. She talked about music in a way she hadn't in 8 months and 31 days. It sounds like you're finding your place, her aunt said, squeezing Sophia's hand across the dinner table. Sophia nodded. Maybe, she said. I'm thinking about auditioning for the showcase. Her aunt's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears. Your father would be so proud, she whispered. This time the words didn't hurt. Instead, they settled in Sophia's heart like a benediction, a permission to move forward without leaving her father behind. That night, Sophia made her decision. She would audition for the showcase, and she knew exactly what piece she would play. The day of the showcase auditions arrived with a mixture of sunshine and clouds, much like Sophia's own emotions. She had spent the past week practicing intensely, rediscovering muscles and reflexes that had gone dormant during her long break from the piano. Her fingers were sore, her shoulders ached, but there was a satisfaction in the physical fatigue that came from doing something she loved. Lily had been true to her word, meeting with Sophia every day during lunch to help her prepare. Despite her own anxiety about her audition, Lily had proven to be a patient coach, focusing on the technical aspects that Sophia needed to refine after her months away from regular practice. In return, Sophia had worked with Lily on bringing emotion to her Chopin ballade. It had been a struggle at first. Lily was so used to focusing on perfect execution that she found it hard to let go and feel the music. But gradually she had begun to understand what Sophia was trying to show her. It's like the difference between reading a speech and having a conversation, Sophia had explained. When you play, you're telling a story, not just reciting notes. Now, as Sophia sat outside the recital hall waiting for her turn to audition, she felt her stomach twist with nerves. She hadn't performed for judges in nearly a year. What if she froze? What if her fingers wouldn't cooperate? What if the grief that was always just below the surface suddenly overwhelmed her? The door opened and a pale-faced boy emerged, clutching his violin case. They're ready for the next person, he said to no one in particular. Sophia stood, smoothing her skirt with damp palms. As she moved toward the door, Lily appeared around the corner, slightly out of breath. Did I miss it? Are you going in now? She asked. Sophia nodded, surprised. Shouldn't you be in class? I told Mr. Diaz I had a women's issue, Lily said with a small smile. He got flustered and wrote me a pass immediately. Despite her nerves, Sophia laughed. That's terrible, but effective. Lily squeezed her arm. You're going to be amazing. Just play like you do when it's just us, okay? Like no one's watching. Sophia took a deep breath and entered the recital hall. 4 teachers sat at a table in the center of the room. Ms. Reynolds, Dr. Chen, Mr. Abernathy, the strings teacher, and Mrs. Davis, who taught woodwinds. They looked up as she approached, their faces neutral and professional. Sophia Chen, Ms. Reynolds said, checking her list. What will you be playing for us today? Sophia placed her sheet music on the piano, though she wouldn't need it. This piece lived in her heart, in her fingers, in her very bones. I'll be playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor, first movement, she said. her voice steadier than she felt. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. It was an ambitious choice for a high school audition, but she simply nodded and made a note on her paper. Sophia sat at the bench, adjusting it to the right height. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. In her mind, she could see her father sitting in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. She could hear Mr. Wu's voice. "The piano is your voice. Speak through it." She began to play. The opening theme was simple, almost plain, a deceptive start to one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. Sophia played it with a quiet intensity, like someone telling a secret. As the piece progressed, growing more complex with each measure, she felt herself disappearing into the music, becoming merely the vessel through which Rachmaninoff's notes flowed into the world. When she reached the cadenza, the extended solo section that had once seemed impossibly difficult, Sophia chose the more complex of the two versions Rachmaninoff had written. Her fingers flew across the keys, finding patterns and pathways that her conscious mind could barely track. She made a few small mistakes, notes that weren't quite clean or phrases that could have been more precise, but she didn't let them derail her. She simply kept going, kept telling the story. By the time she reached the powerful conclusion of the first movement, Sophia was no longer thinking about technique or impressing the judges. She was thinking about her father, about how music had connected them, about how he had always believed in her talent even when she doubted herself. She poured all of that emotion into the final passages, ending with a decisive chord that seemed to hang in the air, even after her hands lifted from the keys. There was a moment of complete silence. Sophia sat still, breathing hard, waiting. "Thank you, Miss Chen," Dr. Chen said finally, her voice revealing nothing. That was illuminating. Sophia stood, gathering her sheet music with slightly shaky hands. "Thank you for listening," she said politely, the formal phrase her old teacher had drilled into her after every performance. As she turned to leave, Ms. Reynolds called after her. "Results will be posted tomorrow morning. The showcase is 3 weeks from Saturday." Sophia nodded and hurried out, feeling lightheaded from the adrenaline crash. Lily was waiting in the hallway, practically bouncing with anticipation. "Well?" she demanded. "How did it go?" "I think okay," Sophia said uncertainly. "I made some mistakes, but I didn't stop." Dr. Chen said it was illuminating, whatever that means. Coming from her, that's practically a standing ovation, Lily assured her. "Now we just have to wait until tomorrow." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Sophia went through her classes mechanically, her mind still echoing with Rachmaninoff. That evening, she called her grandmother in Shanghai, something she hadn't done in months. "I played today, Nai," she said in Mandarin. "For an audition?" Her grandmother's voice cracked with emotion. "Oh, little one. Your father would be so happy, I think." "I think he would," Sophia agreed, tears welling in her eyes. "I miss him so much." "He is in the music," her grandmother said softly. "When you play, he hears you." Sophia slept fitfully that night, dreaming of pianos with keys that turned to water under her fingers. She woke early before her alarm and dressed with unusual care. Whatever the outcome of the audition, today marked a turning point. She had played again, really played. Not just for herself or for her friends, but for an audience. She had broken the silence of 8 months and 38 days. When Sophia arrived at school, there was already a crowd gathered around the bulletin board outside the music wing. She hesitated, suddenly afraid to look at the list. What if her name wasn't there? "Sophia!" Thomas called, spotting her from the edge of the crowd. He pushed his way toward her, his face split by an enormous grin. "You made it. You're in." Relief and joy surged through her. "Really?" "Second slot in the program," he confirmed. "It's a big deal. They usually put the best performers in the first and last few slots." Sophia scanned the crowd, looking for Lily. "What about Lily? Did she make it too?" Thomas nodded. "Closing the show. She texted me earlier. She's thrilled." Sophia finally made her way to the bulletin board to see for herself. There it was, printed in black and white. Sophia Chen, piano. Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor, first movement. As she stared at her name, someone tapped her shoulder. She turned to find Dr. Chen standing behind her, her usual stern expression softened by what might have been a smile. "Congratulations, Miss Chen," the teacher said. Your technique needs some refinement after your break, but your musicality is extraordinary. With proper coaching, you could have a future in this." Sophia swallowed hard. "Thank you, Dr. Chen, that means a lot." "Ms. Reynolds tells me you studied with Wu Liang," Dr. Chen continued. "I trained with him myself many years ago. He doesn't waste his time on students without potential." Before Sophia could respond, Dr. Chen handed her a business card. "This is the contact information for Professor Lin at the Eastman School of Music. She's an old colleague who specializes in the Russian Romantics. I've already emailed her about you. She'll be at the showcase." Sophia stared at the card, stunned. Eastman was one of the top music schools in the country. "I thank you," she managed. Dr. Chen nodded briskly. "Don't thank me yet. You have 3 weeks to get that Rachmaninoff performance competition ready. I expect you to work with Ms. Reynolds daily." With that, she strode away, leaving Sophia clutching the business card like a lifeline. The 3 weeks leading up to the showcase passed in a whirlwind of practice, schoolwork, and more practice. Sophia's aunt bought her a new dress for the performance, dark blue with silver accents that caught the light when she moved. The chamber group continued to rehearse, preparing for their own slot in the showcase. And Sophia and Lily kept their pact, helping each other refine their solo pieces. The night of the showcase, the recital hall was packed with students, parents, teachers, and, most nerve-wracking of all, representatives from music schools across the country. Sophia peeked through the curtain, trying to calm her racing heart. "Nervous?" Lily asked, appearing beside her in a striking red dress, her hair swept up elegantly. "Terrified," Sophia admitted. "Me too," Lily confessed. "But you know what? We're ready, both of us." Sophia smiled at her, amazed by how much had changed in just a few weeks. From strangers to rivals to friends, it had been a journey neither of them could have predicted. When it was Sophia's turn to perform, she walked onto the stage with her head high. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, but she knew her aunt was there in the 3rd row. And somewhere, somehow, she felt her father was watching too. Sophia sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. She took a deep breath and began to play. The music flowed from her fingers like water, like light, like love. Every note was a memory, every phrase a story. She played for herself, for her father, for everyone who had helped her find her way back to music. She played with technical precision, but also with heart, with soul, with all the emotion that had been locked inside her for 8 months and 59 days. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of silence, and then the audience erupted in applause. Sophia stood slightly dazed and bowed. As she straightened, she caught sight of Lily in the wings, giving her a thumbs up with tears in her eyes. Later, after Lily's equally triumphant performance, after the chamber group had played their piece to enthusiastic applause, after the reception where Professor Lin from Eastman had spoken with both Sophia and Lily about auditions for the following year, Sophia found herself alone in the now empty recital hall. She sat at the piano one more time, not to play, just to be still with the instrument that had brought her through the darkest time in her life. "I did it, Baba," she whispered. "I played again." And somewhere in the quiet stillness of the room, in the space between notes where music lived, Sophia felt her father's answer. Pride, joy, love, always love. Victor's fingers danced across the keys with practiced precision, his body swaying slightly as the music flowed through him. He began with Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a piece he had performed hundreds of times yet still found challenging in its emotional range. The acoustics in the small town hall were surprisingly good, the notes hanging in the air just long enough before fading. As he played, Victor found himself unusually aware of the audience. Normally, he entered a state where nothing existed except himself and the piano, the listeners becoming a distant, faceless entity beyond the glare of stage lights. But tonight he kept thinking about the woman in the back row, Eleanor from the cafe, and wondering what she heard in his performance. Did she recognize the technical difficulty of the arpeggios? Could she appreciate the subtle timing adjustments he made to emphasize certain phrases? Or was she simply swept up in the emotional current, understanding nothing of the mechanics that created it? The thought irritated him, causing him to press a key with more force than intended. Victor frowned slightly, annoyed at his own lapse in concentration. He refocused, pushing all thoughts of the cafe waitress from his mind as he transitioned into a Beethoven sonata. By intermission, Victor had regained his usual composure, receiving enthusiastic applause as he bowed and exited the stage. Backstage, he dabbed at his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief while Diane handed him a bottle of spring water. "They love you," she said, checking messages on her phone. "The local arts reporter is already posting glowing comments online." "The bar is rather low here," Victor replied, taking a sip of water. "I doubt many of them have heard world-class piano performed live before." Brian entered the green room looking pleased. "Full house, and they're eating it up. The symphony board members are over the moon. Ticket sales for their regular season have already jumped just from your appearance." Victor nodded absently, his mind drifting back to the cafe incident. The memory of the laughter at Eleanor's expense now felt sour, unworthy. "That woman from the cafe is here," he said suddenly. "Who?" Brian looked up from the plate of cheese and crackers he was assembling. "The waitress, the one who likes Chopin but doesn't understand him." Victor set down his water bottle. "I saw her in the back row." Diane glanced up from her phone. "Does it matter?" "No," Victor said quickly. "It's just, I was perhaps a bit harsh earlier." Brian laughed. "You weren't harsh, you were honest. People like that want to claim classical music without putting in the work to truly understand it." Victor didn't respond. He walked to the door of the green room and peered out into the hallway where audience members mingled during intermission. Through the crowd, he spotted Eleanor standing alone near a display of historical concert programs, studying them with genuine interest. She looked different outside her work uniform, smaller somehow but with a quiet dignity that hadn't been apparent in the cafe. Making a sudden decision, Victor strode toward her. People noticed him immediately, conversations halting as he passed. A path cleared, and before he knew it, he was standing in front of Eleanor, whose eyes widened in surprise. "You came to the concert," he said, immediately regretting the obvious statement. Eleanor nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Yes, I've been saving up since they announced you were coming." "I wouldn't have missed it." Victor found himself at a rare loss for words. Up close, he noticed details he'd missed earlier. The slight tremor in her hands that spoke of nerves or perhaps age. The simple pearl earrings that were probably her best jewelry. The worn but carefully polished shoes. "Are you enjoying it?" he asked finally. "Very much." Her eyes lit up. "Your Chopin made me cry." "I tried not to, but..." She shrugged with a small smile. "It was like hearing someone tell a sad story in a language I don't quite speak, but still understanding every word." The description caught Victor off guard. It was poetic, not technical, yet somehow captured exactly what Chopin had intended with the piece. "I wanted to apologize," he said, lowering his voice so nearby listeners couldn't hear. "For this afternoon. My comments were unnecessary." Eleanor shook her head. "No need. You were right. I don't understand the theory or the technical aspects. I just love the music." Before Victor could respond, the lights flickered, signaling the end of intermission. Audience members began moving back toward the auditorium. "I should go," Eleanor said, already stepping away. "Thank you for speaking with me. It's a memory I'll treasure." As she turned to leave, Victor was struck by a sudden impulse. "Wait," he called after her. Eleanor paused, looking back questioningly. "How would you like to try it?" he asked, gesturing toward the auditorium where the grand piano waited on stage. "Try what?" "Playing," Victor said. "On my piano." "After the concert?" Eleanor's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly—" "Just a simple piece," Victor pressed, not entirely sure why he was doing this. Part of him wanted to make amends for his rudeness earlier, but another part, the part he was less proud of, wanted to demonstrate the vast difference between appreciation and mastery. Something easy. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," perhaps. From the corner of his eye, Victor noticed Brian and Diane watching with concerned expressions. Several audience members had also stopped to observe the exchange. "Really, I wouldn't know how—" Eleanor began. "I insist," Victor said, his voice carrying enough authority that she fell silent. "In fact, why wait? I'll invite you up during the second half. A little audience participation to liven things up." Eleanor's face had gone pale. "Mr. Renaud, please, I'd be mortified." "Nonsense," Victor said, warming to the idea. "Everyone loves a bit of spontaneity. Just a simple tune to show that music belongs to everyone, not just trained musicians." He smiled, thinking this gesture would show his generous side to the audience while gently proving his point about the difference between appreciation and skill. The stage manager approached, looking anxious. "Mr. Renault, we need to begin the second half." "Perfect timing," Victor said. He turned to Eleanor with what he thought was an encouraging smile. "Stay right where you are. I'll call you up before the finale." Without waiting for her response, Victor followed the stage manager back toward the stage, feeling rather pleased with himself. This unplanned addition would make the evening memorable for the locals, and might even make good material for his publicist. As he took his seat at the piano again, Victor noticed a slight commotion in the back of the hall. Eleanor appeared to be speaking urgently to an usher who shook his head. For a moment, Victor thought she might be trying to leave, but then she returned to her seat, her posture stiff with what he assumed was nervousness. The second half of the concert proceeded flawlessly. Victor played Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 with particular flair, enjoying the gasps from the audience during the most technically challenging passages. As he approached the end of his planned program, he looked toward the back row and caught Eleanor's eye. She looked absolutely terrified. Something about her expression gave Victor pause. Was this actually cruel rather than generous? But no. He had offered her a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to play on a concert grand piano under the guidance of a master. Any music lover would be thrilled, even if nervous. After completing his final scheduled piece, Victor stood to acknowledge the enthusiastic applause. Instead of leaving the stage, however, he stepped to the microphone that had been set up for announcements. "Thank you all for your warm welcome to Mapleton," he said, his concert voice projecting to the back of the hall. "Before I play my encore, I'd like to try something a little different," the audience murmured with interest. "Earlier today, I met someone who reminded me that music belongs to everyone, not just those of us fortunate enough to study it formally." Victor scanned the back row. "Eleanor Wells, would you please join me on stage?" A spotlight swung to illuminate Eleanor, who remained frozen in her seat. The audience turned to look at her, a few people nearby encouraging her to go up. Victor saw her shake her head slightly, her expression mortified. "Don't be shy," Victor called, maintaining his smile. "Just a simple tune to show that music is universal." The audience began to applaud encouragingly, several people now urging Eleanor to accept the invitation. Victor watched as she finally rose from her seat, her movements stiff and reluctant. She made her way down the aisle toward the stage, her eyes fixed on the floor. As she climbed the steps to the stage, Victor noticed that her hands were trembling visibly. A twinge of guilt passed through him, but he pushed it aside. This would be a charming moment. A master graciously sharing his instrument with an amateur. The audience would love it, and Eleanor would have a story to tell for years. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eleanor Wells," Victor announced as she reached him. Up close, he could see that her face was flushed with embarrassment, her breathing rapid. "Eleanor works at the local cafe and is a great lover of music. I've invited her to play something simple on this magnificent piano." He gestured toward the instrument with a flourish, then turned to Eleanor with what he intended as an encouraging smile. "Perhaps Twinkle, Twinkle or Mary Had a Little Lamb, whatever you feel comfortable with." Eleanor stared at the piano as if it might bite her. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the audience waited. Victor began to worry that she might refuse or, worse, burst into tears. Then, taking a deep breath, Eleanor squared her shoulders and walked toward the piano. Victor stepped aside, expecting her to sit tentatively at the edge of the bench. Instead, she adjusted it with the practiced movement of someone who knew exactly how far she needed to be from the keys. Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised by the confident gesture. He watched as Eleanor settled herself, placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something had changed in her expression. The fear was gone, replaced by a look of complete focus that Victor recognized all too well. And then Eleanor began to play. The first notes hung in the air like delicate crystals. Not the simple melody Victor had expected, but the opening bars of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. Victor's mouth fell open. He blinked rapidly, certain he must be hearing things. But no. Eleanor's fingers were moving across the keys with unmistakable confidence, drawing out the haunting melody with perfect timing and touch. The audience, which had been rustling with anticipation of a charming amateur moment, fell completely silent. Even the usual coughs and whispers disappeared as everyone in the hall realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Victor stood frozen at the side of the stage, watching Eleanor's hands. They were the same hands he had seen pouring coffee just hours earlier, rough from work with short nails and no polish. But now they transformed, seeming to hover above the keys before striking with precision and grace, creating cascades of notes that filled the hall. His shock gave way to professional assessment. Her technique was unusual, not textbook perfect like conservatory graduates, but effective and deeply personal. She played the emotionally charged piece with raw feeling that professionals often lost after years of technical drills. There was something almost wild in her interpretation, yet she never lost control. As Eleanor reached the end of the first movement, Victor became aware that he had been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly, his mind racing. Who was this woman? How had he missed the signs? A waitress in a small-town cafe who played Rachmaninoff like this? Brian had appeared at the edge of the stage, his face a mask of confusion. He caught Victor's eye and mouthed, "What's happening?" Victor could only shake his head in response. Eleanor paused between movements, her shoulders rising and falling with deep breaths. For a moment, Victor thought she might stop, overcome by the situation. But then her hands returned to the keys and she began the second movement, the famous Adagio sostenuto with its heartbreaking melody. From where he stood, Victor could see Eleanor's face in profile. Her eyes were closed, tears tracking silently down her cheeks as she played. Yet her hands never faltered, drawing out each note with perfect clarity and feeling. The audience remained spellbound. Victor noticed an elderly man in the front row openly weeping, while a young girl stared at Eleanor with wide, wonder-filled eyes. Even the usual restless teenagers sat perfectly still, their phones forgotten in their laps. As he listened, Victor's initial shock transformed into something deeper, a kind of reverence mixed with shame. He had mocked this woman, had used her as a prop to demonstrate his own superiority. The memory now made him flush with embarrassment. Eleanor moved into the third movement, her tempo perfect, her dynamics shaped with instinctive musicality. Victor found himself watching her hands with the focus of a student observing a master. Though he would never admit it aloud, there were elements of her playing that surpassed his own, a raw emotional connection that his years of technical training had sometimes diminished. When the final notes of the concerto faded, the hall remained silent for one breath, two breaths, that magical moment when a truly great performance leaves an audience too moved to respond immediately. Then the applause began. It started slowly, like the first raindrops before a storm, then built rapidly into a thunderous standing ovation. People rose to their feet row by row, their faces showing the same astonishment Victor felt. Some were calling bravo, while others simply clapped with all their might. Eleanor sat motionless at the piano for several seconds as if waking from a dream. Then she stood, her movements tentative again, and gave a small, awkward bow. The contrast between the commanding presence who had just played Rachmaninoff and this humble woman in her simple blue dress made the moment all the more powerful. Victor found himself moving forward, without conscious thought. He reached Eleanor's side and, in a gesture he reserved for only the most respected colleagues, took her hand and raised it high, presenting her properly to the audience. Their applause crescendoed in response. That was, Victor began, but found he had no words adequate to the moment. Eleanor's face was flushed, her eyes bright with tears, and something like joy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know you expected Twinkle Twinkle, but once I touched the keys I couldn't help myself." Victor shook his head in disbelief. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing at all." He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I made assumptions that were completely wrong." The applause showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, it grew louder as the audience processed what they had witnessed. Victor recognized the special quality of the moment. This wasn't just appreciation for beautiful music, but the shared experience of having expectations completely upended. "We should take another bow," he said to Eleanor. Together, she looked uncertain but nodded. They bowed in unison, Eleanor following Victor's lead but with a natural grace that suggested she had done this before, perhaps long ago. As they straightened, Victor whispered, "They'll want an encore." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Yes, you can," Victor said firmly. "They deserve it, and so do you." The stage manager approached, looking bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. "Mr. Renault, what should we do? This isn't in the program." "Change of plans," Victor replied without taking his eyes off Eleanor. "We're doing an encore. Ms. Wells will play—" He looked at her questioningly. Eleanor hesitated only briefly. "Debussy," she said softly. "Clair de Lune?" Victor nodded his approval. It was a perfect choice, beloved by audiences and a piece that would showcase her sensitivity as a performer. The stage manager looked between them, clearly confused, but unwilling to argue with the famous pianist. He retreated and Victor guided Eleanor back to the piano. "Play as you feel it," he told her. "This is your moment." Eleanor sat down again, took a deep breath, and began the gentle opening of Debussy's most famous work. If the Rachmaninoff had showcased her technical ability, Clair de Lune revealed her soul. She played the familiar piece as if it were being discovered for the first time, finding nuances that even Victor, who had performed it countless times, had never considered. As he watched her, Victor found himself wondering about her story. How does someone with this level of talent end up pouring coffee in a small-town cafe? What circumstances had led her away from concert halls and recording studios? The questions multiplied in his mind as the beautiful music filled the hall. When Eleanor finished the encore, the audience's response was, if possible, even more emotional than before. People were hugging each other, pointing at the stage, shaking their heads in amazement. The local music teachers who had been in the cafe earlier were talking excitedly among themselves, gesturing toward Eleanor with expressions of stunned disbelief. As the applause finally began to subside, Victor stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all experienced something truly special tonight." His voice was thick with emotion he didn't bother to hide. "Ms. Eleanor Wells, everyone." Another round of applause erupted as Eleanor stood and gave a more confident bow, the decades-old muscle memory apparently returning. As they walked off stage together, Eleanor seemed to shrink slightly, the commanding presence she had projected while playing fading back into her usual, unassuming demeanor. In the wings, Brian, Diane, and several symphony board members waited, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and delight. "That was unexpected," Brian said, finding his voice first. "Indeed," Victor replied dryly. "Ms. Wells, where did you study?" asked one of the board members, a white-haired woman with an elegant bearing. Eleanor looked down at her hands, now clasped tightly together. "Juilliard," she said quietly. "A long time ago." The revelation sent another ripple of surprise through the small group. Juilliard was among the most prestigious music schools in the world, accepting only the most talented students. But how? Diane began, then stopped herself, apparently realizing the question might be too personal. Victor sensed Eleanor's discomfort with being the center of attention. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private," he suggested, glancing meaningfully at the stage crew and various onlookers who had gathered nearby. The symphony board president nodded quickly. "Of course. The reception room is prepared for the post-concert gathering. We could go there now." As they moved down the hallway toward the reception room, Victor found himself walking beside Eleanor. Away from the piano, she seemed smaller again, less certain. "You don't have to explain anything if you don't want to," he told her quietly. Eleanor looked up at him, her expression grateful but resolved. "No, it's all right. It's been a long time since I've talked about this part of my life, but maybe it's time." She took a deep breath. "It's not a sad story, really. Just a different path than the one I started on." They entered the reception room, where a small crowd of VIP ticket holders and local dignitaries waited. A murmur of excitement spread as Eleanor entered, and several people stepped forward with questions and congratulations. Victor watched as she accepted their praise with genuine humility. There was no bitterness in her manner, no sense of missed opportunities or regret. Whatever had led her from Juilliard to this small town, she appeared at peace with her choices. As the crowd around Eleanor grew, Victor found himself standing slightly apart, observing rather than participating. The evening had not gone as planned in any way, but he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Something important had happened here, something that went beyond music to touch on deeper truths about assumptions, opportunities, and the different paths a life could take. He caught Eleanor's eye across the room, and she gave him a small, knowing smile that suggested she understood exactly what he was thinking. In that moment, despite all his fame and accomplishments, Victor felt like the student, not the master. The reception room buzzed with excitement. People clustered around Eleanor, asking questions that tumbled over one another. How long had she been playing? Where had she performed? Why hadn't they heard of her before? Eleanor answered politely but briefly, her eyes occasionally seeking Victor across the room as if looking for rescue. Victor recognized her discomfort and made his way through the crowd. "I believe Ms. Wells might appreciate a moment to catch her breath," he said, his tone pleasant but firm. The well-meaning interrogator stepped back, allowing Eleanor some space. "Thank you," she murmured. "Perhaps some air," Victor suggested, nodding toward French doors that opened onto a small balcony overlooking the town square. Eleanor nodded gratefully, and they slipped outside. The night air was cool and carried the scent of late summer flowers from planters along the balcony edge. Below them, the square was quiet, with only a few people strolling beneath the yellow glow of old-fashioned street lamps. For a few minutes, they stood in companionable silence, a marked contrast to the tension of their cafe encounter earlier that day. Victor found himself reluctant to break the peace, but his curiosity finally won out. "Will you tell me?" he asked softly. "Not because I'm entitled to know, but because I'd like to understand." Eleanor gazed out at the town square, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the stone balustrade. "It's not a dramatic story," she said finally. "No tragedy, no scandal. Just life taking unexpected turns." She turned to face him, leaning against the balcony rail. "I was at Juilliard on a full scholarship. My teacher said I had promise." Her lips curved in a small self-deprecating smile. "I was 19. Arrogant in the way only young artists can be. Absolutely certain I was destined for greatness." Victor nodded, remembering his own youthful confidence. "My third year there, my parents died. Car accident," Eleanor continued, her voice matter-of-fact rather than sorrowful. "They left behind my sister and brother, twins just 12 years old." She looked up at the stars, now visible in the darkening sky. "I was their only relative who could take them in." "You left school?" Victor said, the pieces beginning to fall into place. Eleanor nodded. "I deferred for a semester, thinking I could manage both. But 2 grieving 12-year-olds needed more than part-time parenting, and Juilliard needed more than part-time commitment." She shrugged slightly. "Something had to give." "So you gave up your career," Victor said, trying to imagine making such a choice at that age. He wasn't sure he would have had the strength. "I moved back home, here to Mapleton. Got a job waiting tables because the hours were flexible. Kept a piano in the house and played when I could." Eleanor's expression softened with memory. The twins loved music too. Not classical, they were into rock and folk, but they'd sit and listen sometimes when I practiced. "You never went back?" Victor asked. "After they grew up?" Eleanor shook her head. "By then I was 30. The classical piano world isn't kind to 30-year-old women trying to launch careers." She laughed softly. "Besides, somewhere along the way I realized I didn't miss the pressure, the competition. I missed the music, yes, but not the rest of it." Victor considered this. Throughout his career, he had viewed the competitive aspect of classical music as inseparable from the art itself, the striving for perfection, for recognition. The idea that someone could love the music deeply without craving the spotlight was almost foreign to him. "You could have taught at a conservatory," he suggested. "With your talent, I do teach," Eleanor interrupted gently. "I have 12 students right now, kids from around town who can't afford fancy lessons. Some of them pay me in cookies or garden vegetables." Her eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "Last year, one of my students got a full scholarship to study music education. First in her family to go to college." She turned back to gaze at the town square. "I play for the community theater productions, for church services when they need someone, for nursing home residents who remember the old songs." She took a deep breath. "It's not Carnegie Hall, but it matters to people here." Victor found himself speechless. The life she described was so different from his own. No international tours, no recording contracts, no glowing reviews in prestigious music publications. Yet there was a quiet dignity in her choices, a purpose he sometimes struggled to find in his own success. The balcony doors opened, and Diane poked her head out. "Victor, the symphony board president, is looking for you." "Something about a speech?" "Tell him I'll be there shortly," Victor replied, not taking his eyes off Eleanor. When Diane had gone, Eleanor smiled apologetically. You should go back in. They're all waiting for you. They're waiting for both of us, Victor corrected. You're the star of the evening. Eleanor shook her head. No, that was just a moment, a lovely moment, but not my real life. She brushed a strand of hair from her face. Tomorrow I'll be back at the cafe pouring coffee. The matter-of-fact way she said it struck Victor deeply. There was no self-pity in her voice, no sense of missed opportunities, just a simple statement of reality. Come back inside with me, he said impulsively. Play something else. The world should hear you. Eleanor considered him with kind eyes. Why does it matter so much to you? The question caught Victor off guard. Why did it matter? Was it because her talent deserved recognition? Or was it because her choices challenged his own understanding of success? Before he could formulate an answer, the balcony doors opened again, and this time Brian emerged, followed by several board members. There you are, Brian said, his tone slightly impatient. Everyone's waiting. He glanced at Eleanor with newfound respect. Ms. Wells, that was quite a performance. Quite unexpected. Thank you, Eleanor said simply. The symphony board president stepped forward, an elderly gentleman with an impressive white mustache. Ms. Wells, we would be honored if you would say a few words to our patrons. Many of them are quite moved by your playing and your unusual story. Eleanor looked uncomfortable. I'm not sure what I would say. Just tell them what you told me, Victor suggested quietly. She met his eyes, seeming to search for something there. Whatever she found must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. All right. They returned to the reception room, which had grown more crowded as word spread about the evening's unexpected turn of events. The crowd parted as Eleanor entered, whispers following in her wake. Victor noticed the local music teachers who had been in the cafe that afternoon watching her with expressions ranging from astonishment to embarrassment. The board president tapped a spoon against his champagne glass, calling for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we've witnessed something extraordinary tonight. He gestured toward Eleanor. I've asked Ms. Wells to share a few words with us about her remarkable journey. A hush fell over the room as Eleanor stepped forward. Gone was the confident performer who had commanded the stage, replaced by a woman who seemed slightly uncomfortable with so many eyes upon her. Yet there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. I'm not used to making speeches, she began, her voice soft but clear. The last time I spoke in front of a crowd was for my high school graduation. This drew a gentle laugh from the audience. Music has always been part of my life, Eleanor continued, gaining confidence. I was fortunate to study at Juilliard many years ago, but life took me in a different direction. She briefly explained about her siblings, her voice warming as she spoke of them. My brother runs the hardware store over on Maple Street, and my sister teaches second grade at the elementary school. They both have families of their own now. She paused, looking around at the attentive faces. I don't regret the choice I made. Music hasn't been absent from my life, just present in different ways than I once imagined. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on the local music teachers. I play for our community theater productions. I teach children whose parents can't afford expensive lessons. I play for church services and at the nursing home. Her voice strengthened. Music isn't about fame or fortune. It's about bringing beauty into the world, whether you're playing at Carnegie Hall or in your living room. The room was completely silent, her words landing with quiet force. Even Brian, who had been checking his phone, looked up, his expression thoughtful. Tonight was a gift, Eleanor concluded, looking toward Victor. A chance to play on a magnificent piano for an appreciative audience. I'm grateful for that opportunity, but I'm equally grateful for the life I've built here, where music serves my community rather than my ambition. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. Victor found himself clapping harder than anyone, moved by the simple wisdom of her words. He had spent his career chasing excellence, recognition, and perfection, sometimes forgetting the fundamental purpose of music, to touch hearts and create beauty. As the applause died down, the board president stepped forward again. Ms. Wells, on behalf of the Mapleton Symphony Society, I'd like to invite you to perform as a featured soloist in our spring concert series. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Eleanor looked startled by the offer. I'd need to think about that, she said hesitantly. Of course. The president nodded enthusiastically. No rush at all. As the formal part of the reception concluded and people broke into smaller conversational groups, Victor made his way to Eleanor's side. "You should accept," he said without preamble. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Should I?" "Your talent deserves to be heard," Victor insisted. "Not just by nursing home residents and community theater audiences." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Those audiences deserve beautiful music too, don't they?" Victor opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, struck by the gentle rebuke in her question. "Yes," he admitted. "They do." "The world has many brilliant pianists playing in grand concert halls," Eleanor said, her voice kind but firm. "But not every child has someone to teach them that music belongs to everyone, not just the gifted and the privileged." Her words hit Victor with unexpected force. Throughout his career, he had viewed music as a pursuit of excellence, a domain where only the most talented and dedicated deserved to be heard. Eleanor's perspective challenged that fundamental assumption. "You've given me something to think about," he said finally. Eleanor smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her ordinary features into something luminous. "Then we're even. Because you've given me something too, a night to remember for the rest of my life." Around them, the reception continued, but Victor barely noticed the conversations and congratulations swirling through the room. His mind was too full of new questions and possibilities, sparked by this unexpected encounter with a cafe waitress who played Rachmaninoff with her heart wide open. The morning after the concert, Victor sat alone in his hotel room, staring out the window at Mapleton's quiet main street. In a few hours, he would board a private car to the airport, fly to New York, and resume his carefully scheduled life of concerts, recordings, and masterclasses. Yet something had shifted inside him, like a piano string tightened to a slightly different pitch. Eleanor's words kept playing in his mind. "Music isn't about fame or fortune. It's about bringing beauty into the world, whether you're playing at Carnegie Hall or in your living room." He had dismissed similar sentiments countless times throughout his career. Well-meaning teachers and mentors had tried to remind him that music was about more than technical perfection or critical acclaim. He had always nodded politely while thinking they simply lacked the drive for true excellence. But hearing those words from Eleanor, watching her play Rachmaninoff with such raw emotion after choosing a life so different from what she might have, had made him question assumptions he'd held for decades. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Diane entered with his morning coffee and schedule. "Car's confirmed for 11, she said, setting down the cup. "And Brian's handling the last details with the symphony board." She glanced at Victor, frowning slightly. "Are you feeling all right? You seem distracted." Victor took a sip of coffee. "I'm fine. Just thinking about last night." "It was certainly unexpected," Diane agreed. "That waitress was something else." Brian's already fielding calls from local media wanting interviews about the discovered piano prodigy. She smiled. "Good publicity for the tour." Victor frowned. "She's hardly a prodigy. She studied at Juilliard." "Even better story," Diane said pragmatically. "From Juilliard to pouring coffee. People love that kind of thing, talent hidden in ordinary places." She checked her phone. "Speaking of coffee, do you want to stop at that cafe before we leave? Brian thought it might make a good photo opportunity. You and the waitress Pianist." Victor set down his cup with more force than necessary. "Her name is Eleanor Wells. And no, I don't want to turn her into a photo opportunity." Diane looked surprised by his sharp tone. "Sorry, just trying to maximize the positive press." Victor sighed. "I know. But this isn't about press or publicity." He stood up and walked to the window again. "I'd like to visit the cafe, but privately. No photographers, no social media posts." "All right," Diane said carefully. "I'll tell Brian. We can stop there around 9:30 before checking out." After she left, Victor picked up his phone and found himself searching for information about musical education charities. By the time he needed to dress for the day, he had bookmarked several organizations that provided instruments and lessons to children who couldn't afford them. The cafe was busy when Victor arrived. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the simple interior he had barely noticed the day before. Local artwork hung on the walls, and a small bulletin board near the entrance was covered with community announcements. Piano lessons offered, a local choir seeking members, a children's recital at the community center. Eleanor was behind the counter, taking orders and making change. She looked up as the bell above the door announced Victor's arrival, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. Unlike yesterday, there was no fear or intimidation in her expression, just curiosity. Victor made his way to the counter, aware of the whispers and stares from other customers who had either attended the concert or heard about it afterward. In a town this size, news would have spread quickly. "Good morning," Eleanor said when he reached her. "I didn't expect to see you here again. We're leaving town soon," Victor explained. "I wanted to say goodbye properly." Eleanor nodded, her expression warm but reserved. "Would you like coffee? I promise not to be offended if you find it bitter." The gentle teasing made Victor smile. "Coffee would be great. And maybe a few minutes of your time, if that's possible?" Eleanor glanced at her coworker, a younger woman who was watching their exchange with undisguised curiosity. "Jenny, can you cover for me for a bit?" The woman nodded eagerly. "Take all the time you need. After last night, you're practically a celebrity." Eleanor rolled her eyes good-naturedly and came out from behind the counter. "Let's sit over there," she said, pointing to a corner table partially screened by a large potted plant. "It's a little more private." Once they were seated with coffee, Victor found himself uncharacteristically nervous. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say on the walk over, but now the words seemed inadequate. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," he began, "about music belonging to everyone, not just those in concert halls." Eleanor nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent my entire career focused on perfection, on being the best," Victor admitted. "I've looked down on amateur musicians, on those who play for the love of it rather than the pursuit of excellence." He met her eyes directly. "I was wrong." Eleanor's expression softened. "Not entirely wrong," she said. "Excellence matters. Discipline matters. You've achieved remarkable things because of your dedication." "Yes, but at what cost?" Victor asked, surprising himself with the question. "I've missed so much. I can't remember the last time I played just for the joy of it, without worrying about critics or audiences or my reputation." "It's never too late to rediscover that joy," Eleanor said gently. Victor took a deep breath. "I've made a decision. I'm establishing a scholarship fund." Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "A scholarship?" "The Eleanor Wells Music Education Fund," Victor said, watching her face carefully. "For talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Not just for those aiming for professional careers, but for anyone who loves music and wants to learn." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Victor, that's—" "I'm honored, but you don't need to use my name. I haven't done anything to deserve." "You've done everything to deserve it," Victor interrupted. "You chose to share music with those who needed it most, even when it meant setting aside your own ambitions. That's worth honoring." Eleanor looked down at her coffee cup, clearly moved. "Thank you," she said simply. "There's more," Victor continued. "I'd like you to be on the selection committee. Your perspective would be invaluable." She looked up surprised. "But I'm here in Mapleton and you're in—" "We can make it work," Victor said. "Quarterly meetings, video calls. And perhaps," he hesitated, "perhaps you might consider performing occasionally. Benefit concerts to raise money for the fund." Eleanor bit her lip. "I don't know. It's been so long since I've played for a real audience. Last night was different. I wasn't thinking, just feeling." "That's exactly why people should hear you," Victor insisted. "Too many classical performers, myself included, get so caught up in technical precision that we forget the emotional heart of the music." He leaned forward. "I'm not suggesting a concert tour or recording contract. Just a few performances a year on your terms." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I'd need time to prepare, to practice properly." Victor felt a surge of hope at her words. "Of course. Whatever you need." She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Let me think about it. But the scholarship fund, yes, I'd be honored to help with that however I can." "Excellent," Victor said, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I'll have my foundation team contact you with the details." Their conversation shifted then to music itself. Favorite composers, interpretations, teaching techniques. Victor found himself engaged in the most genuine discussion of music he'd had in years, free from the competitive undercurrent that usually colored his professional interactions. As they talked, customers came and went. Several stopped by their table to congratulate Eleanor on her performance the previous night. She accepted their praise with the same humble grace she had shown at the reception. Finally, Victor checked his watch reluctantly. I need to go. We have a flight to catch, Eleanor nodded. Of course, they walked together to the door. Outside on the sidewalk, Victor turned to her one last time. Last night you said I had given you a night to remember, but the truth is you've given me far more. He extended his hand. Thank you, Eleanor Wells. Instead of shaking his hand, Eleanor surprised him with a brief hug. Safe travels, Victor Renault. And don't forget to play for joy sometimes, not just for perfection. As Victor walked back to his hotel, he felt lighter somehow, as if he had set down a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. He found himself noticing things he would normally have missed. The way sunlight filtered through tree leaves, the sound of children laughing in a nearby park, a street musician playing guitar on a corner with a case open for tips. On impulse, Victor stopped and dropped $100 bill into the guitar case. The young musician looked up in shock, his thanks following Victor down the street. 6 months later, Victor stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, listening to the murmur of the sold-out crowd. Tonight was special, the inaugural benefit concert for the Eleanor Wells Music Education Fund. The program featured Victor, performing alongside several young musicians who had received the first scholarships, and for the finale, a special guest, Eleanor herself, making her Carnegie Hall debut at the age of 54. Victor peeked through the curtain. In the front row, he could see Eleanor's siblings and their families, their faces shining with pride. Behind them sat a group of Eleanor's piano students from Mapleton, wide-eyed at their first visit to the famous concert hall. Eleanor appeared beside him, dressed in a simple but elegant blue gown. Her hair was styled more formally than he had ever seen it, but she wore the same pearl earrings she had worn the night of the Mapleton concert. Nervous? Victor asked. Eleanor took a deep breath. Terrified, she admitted with a small laugh. But also happy, Victor smiled. Remember what you told me, play for joy, not just for perfection. She nodded, returning his smile. Wise advice. I wonder who said that. Some cafe waitress with extraordinary hidden talents, Victor replied lightly. The stage manager approached. 5 minutes, Mr. Renault. Eleanor squared her shoulders. I never imagined I'd be here. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who would help you get here, Victor admitted. We've both been transformed, I think. When they walked onto the stage together, the applause was deafening. Victor sat at one piano, Eleanor at another. They exchanged a glance, nodded, and began to play. Two artists from different worlds, brought together by music and mutual respect. Their performance a testament to the power of seeing beyond appearances and expectations. In the years that followed, the story of the famous pianist and the cafe waitress became something of a legend in classical music circles. But the true legacy wasn't the story itself. It was the hundreds of young musicians who received scholarships, the community music programs that flourished with new support, and the gradual change in how the classical music world viewed itself and its purpose. And for Victor Renault, the greatest change was internal. He continued to perform at the highest levels, but now he also taught regularly at community music schools, played benefit concerts in small towns, and found at last the joy in music that he had nearly forgotten existed.